And so tonight, I would like to introduce to you Representative Tulsi Gabbard, presidential candidate for the United States of America. Get up, give her a hand, and get active.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Please give Steve a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, for your warm welcome. I want to say thanks really quick to the staff and the management and the team here at the Gathering Place. Thank you so much for hosting us here this evening. And I also want to say thanks to the Potawatomi County Democrats for helping to spread the word about this event. Who's here from the County Democrats? There we go. Thank you so much. I think they're live streaming this as well. And most importantly, thanks to you all for coming here on game day. I know. We just drove. We were in Ames. We were hanging out with people. We were tailgating a little bit this afternoon and kind of been clicking refresh and seeing what's going on. But they're still stuck, aren't they? Weather, Mother Nature. What are you going to do? So thank you. So, maybe later on after this, you can go back and finish watching the game. Really appreciate you taking the time, though. This is great to be back here in Council Bluffs. It's been a little while since we were last here, and a lot's happened since then. One thing that has been coming up a lot lately in a lot of our town halls that we've been having, we were in Newton earlier today. Where were we last night? We were in Cedar Rapids last night and keeping track. We're in Ankeny tomorrow and a few other places. But one of the things that keeps coming up wherever we go, both here in Iowa as well as in other places, is how do we as a country come together? We're in such a time of divisiveness where, especially if you turn on cable news or if all you do is look at social media and Twitter, it seems like we are just further being torn apart every single day. Whether it be based on partisan political lines, ideological lines, race, religion, ethnicity, orientation, that these wedges are being further driven between us, pitting one group against the other. And as heartbreaking as this is, I find hope and inspiration and optimism from gatherings like this that we're having in living rooms and town halls like this everywhere we go, because people like you are making the time in your busy lives and your schedules to come out to recognize that we are the change. We are the change. No one is going to do this for us. That in order for us to truly bring to reality the vision that Abraham Lincoln laid out for us, a government of, by, and for the people, to shift the tides away from the status quo that we have, where our government is owned and controlled by the very few, the very rich, and the very powerful, to the detriment to the rest of us, leaving we the people behind. The obstacles seem so great. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of vested interest, there's a lot of people with a lot of power who will fight against that change. But we know that we are the only ones who can make that change happen. We are the only ones who can overcome those seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And this is not a Democrat thing or Republican thing. This is a we, the American people thing. Taking control of our lives, our destiny, and our future, so that we can begin to bring about real solutions to the problems that have plagued us for so long. And those problems are many. I don't know about you, but I get frustrated because election after election after election, we keep talking about the same old things, right? I was watching some debates from 2016, 2012, 2008, and it was striking to me that many of the questions that moderators were asking and many of the answers that were being given sounded very familiar. That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate for the people of this country. That means we're not making progress. We're not solving problems. And the reason is because of this government of The rich and powerful, self-serving politicians, hyper-partisan politics, people putting politics ahead of the interests of the people putting profits ahead of the interests of the people. And people are more and more struggling and suffering in our country. The vast majority of people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck. How many of you can relate to that? Paycheck to paycheck. Afraid and worried for that emergency that you or a loved one may have that will maybe put you out on the street, that'll break the bank. This is a fear that is common to so many people here, both because of the income inequality that we have, because of the unfair tax policy that we have, and because of the broken healthcare system that we have. I think here in Iowa especially, I've got some friends who've lived here their whole lives. The privatization of Medicaid here has had such an impact in making it so people are going uninsured or underinsured because they can't afford to pay $1,000, $1,500 a month for insurance to cover themselves and their families. Afraid and worried that their baby will get sick. Then what? How will you afford for them to go to the doctor or to go to the hospital? These are the very real consequences of the status quo that we've seen, this government of, by, and for the rich and powerful, and why we can't afford to wait any longer to make the change we need to see. We can't afford to wait any longer to make sure that we have health care for all, quality health care for all. That if you don't have enough money in your pocket and your child gets sick, you're going to be able to go to the hospital and get the quality care that your loved one needs. Period. If you have a great health insurance plan, if you're a member of a union that's got a great negotiated plan, you should be allowed to keep that plan if you want it. But unequivocally, in the wealthiest nation in the world, with all of the advances that we have, no American should be left behind, unable to get the care they need when they need it most. When we stand united, we can bring about the kind of change we need to see to protect our environment. You know, climate change is thankfully coming more and more to the forefront of the political conversations we're having and conversations that we're having across the country. The problem is, though, I think there's two big problems. One is you, again, ask the question, why have we not already been making this transition from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy? Why have we not already been investing in the kinds of sustainable infrastructure that we need to see? Why are we not already making sure that every single American in this country has clean water to drink? You see the influence of big money and big fossil fuel corporations in Washington who have a lot of influence and who stop these changes from being made using that influence. And you see, unfortunately, how, and they play a part in this, but how this issue has become a divisive wedge being used to tear us apart. You have people who are fighting for solutions to bring about change to the problems that our current environment is presenting to us. People who understand that the choices that we make in our lives have a direct impact on our environment. And then on the other side, you have people who say, well, climate change is a hoax. But both sides are pointing fingers at each other and yelling and screaming and saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But meanwhile, in communities all across this country, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, whatever, people are suffering as a result of the inaction, as a result of the policies that we have that are benefiting corporations but ruining our environment. Let's put aside the divisive rhetoric and focus on what's real. What's real is that every one of us as people, as human beings, require clean water to stay alive. It's the one major necessity that we have as people. Clean air to breathe. A safe place for our families to live, for our kids to grow up. Protection of our home, making sure that their kids and their kids and their kids will enjoy the same places that we appreciate all across this country. When we're able to have these conversations with people, as people, then we can find that common ground, those common interests that allow us to make the kinds of progress that we need to see. But as long as we have people in two divisive camps pointing fingers at each other and yelling at each other, we get nowhere. The more that we increase this dialogue, that we treat each other with respect as fellow Americans, the more opportunity that we have to move forward together on that common ground. We, the people, are the only ones who can make this change. We, the people, are the only ones who can bring about the kind of change we need to see in our criminal justice system. Broken criminal justice system and a failed war on drugs that is overwhelming this already broken criminal justice system. There's a number of things that I would do as president to begin to tackle this problem, and the problems are deeply rooted. But one is sign into law the bill that I've introduced into Congress, the only bipartisan bill that actually ends the federal marijuana prohibition. Very simply. Now, some of the biggest opponents to this are the big pharmaceutical companies who continue to profit off of being able to sell more of their drugs because this option is not available to many people in this country. And even in states, I think we're at 33 states now that have legalized either medicinal or recreational use of marijuana. We've seen a direct correlation and a reduction of opioid addiction and opioid-related deaths. So we've got a lot of concern, rightly so, around this opioid epidemic. This is one thing that can be done to actually help bring about a solution. We need to end our cash bail system, a cash bail system that punishes the poor who can't afford to pay bail and rewards the rich. People who sit in our prisons, maybe for some it's hours, days, weeks, and sometimes even months, waiting for their due process and rights. They've not been proven innocent or guilty, but waiting for that due process. But they can't go back to their jobs, their families, their kids, their school when they've been arrested because they can't afford to pay bail. This is hurting people, it's tearing families apart, and it's causing a huge fiscal burden on taxpayers. We were at a town hall we had last weekend here in Iowa. There was a local county supervisor who came and was sharing his concerns, and this was his number one concern, which I was a little surprised about, because usually for county supervisors and mayors, they're talking about basic infrastructure needs, funding for sewage systems and water systems, parks, local law enforcement. But this was his number one issue because this is the biggest drain on their resources at the county level. And it's having a direct impact on their being able to have the money to be able to pay for all the other things that are needed. Another thing that we need to do federally as well as at the state level is to ban private prisons. This is a direct cost to us as taxpayers with a business model that literally is built around keeping those cells and those beds full, rather than seeing, hey, how do we reduce recidivism rates? How do we make it so people who are charged and convicted with a crime, who do their time, get back to their communities and don't come back through this system again? That's not their business model, though. They'd go out of business if that was the case. So we've got to get rid of those private prisons. We've got to end this failed war on drugs. We've got to make it so that we see substance abuse and addiction as a healthcare issue, where we're dedicating resources rather than keeping people locked up towards getting the help that they need. Once again, driving down the recidivism rates and actually helping people. When we look at this war on drugs when it began, these drugs are very harmful to people, so the government passes laws making it a crime because they don't want people to hurt themselves, right? That's the logic. So instead, we'll arrest them and lock them up and give them a criminal record because we don't want them to hurt themselves. Yeah, I would say so. And they end up having to check that box every time they want to get a job or have this criminal record following them wherever they go. We've got to end the failed war on drugs. This is an area where there's great bipartisan agreement. There's opportunity. Just a few months ago in Congress, we passed legislation called the First Step Act, which is a great prison reform bill. We had some of the most conservative members of Congress and the most progressive members of Congress coming together, working together, both being criticized by people in their own parties, saying, you know what, the people come first. And there are thousands of people since the passage of that bill who are serving time in federal prison, who didn't need to be there anymore, who are today home with their families because of this legislation being passed. This is one example of what's possible when we come together and we put the interests of the people ahead of all else. This is the kind of attitude and the kind of leadership we need to bring to solve issues like the immigration crisis, to deal with the crisis that's at the border, provide the resources necessary to judges and administrators and those who are seeking asylum in this country to adjudicate their cases, make it so that they're able to apply for asylum in the countries where they're coming from so they don't feel like their only choice is to trek thousands of miles, putting their lives at risk to seek refuge in our country. To fix our legal immigration system that is broken in every respect. There are so many things that we can do when we break down the partisan barriers and come together and just talk about these issues as people. Investing in education. We hear a lot about how education is a priority for us, that we have to invest in our kids. Our kids are our future. You hear this line so many times, yet so many teachers in our country remain underpaid, and too many kids in our country don't have the basic skills and tools that they need. We had a little girl who came to one of our town halls, and she raised her hand and she asked a question, and she said she can't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. And her question was about funding for arts. And she explained the problem. She said, you know, for me and my classmates, I don't remember the names of her teachers, but she has 2 art teachers, and they used to have their own classroom. And they would go and they'd do their art class in that classroom. But now their teachers said that their school ran out of money, and so they lost their classroom. And the art teachers couldn't do their art projects with them anymore. So even these kids are seeing what the direct impacts are when we're not actually making them a priority. So where is our money going then? If we don't have enough money for infrastructure, we don't have enough money to make sure we have clean water for everybody, we don't have enough money to make sure that we've got quality health care for every American in this country, we don't have enough money to take care of our kids, to make sure we have a safe community, where are all of our taxpayer dollars going? The cost of war. This issue is central. This is an issue that's central to every other issue that we're talking about here. This is one that's deeply personal for me as a soldier and as a veteran. Just a few months ago, back in April, I went back to Hawaii and said goodbye at Hickam Air Force Base to 300 of my fellow soldiers in the Army National Guard who were shipping out for Afghanistan. These were soldiers who were in the unit. It was the unit that I last deployed with during my second deployment. And so there were a number of them. For them, this was their 3rd, 4th, or 5th deployment. A lot of younger soldiers who had never been deployed before. And it broke my heart knowing that I couldn't go with them. And knowing the cost and the toll that this takes, both on them and their families. You know, when we first deployed back in 2004, many of my friends, they weren't married, they didn't have kids. Well, some of these friends were on this deployment now married with 4 kids, 5 kids. And one of my friends just saying, you know, my 15-year-old daughter is beginning to learn how to drive. And that's what she said, Dad, you're not going to be home to help teach me how to drive. And for him and his daughter, that was a big deal. What to speak of the fact that as we know, as veterans who are here, when you say goodbye to your loved ones before you go on this deployment, you don't know if that'll be your last goodbye. And that as a soldier, you've got to leave with that mindset at peace that that could be your final goodbye, so that you can focus on the mission, the job that you have at hand. There is a very deep human, personal cost of war that our service members pay, that they are still paying. We've seen at least 3 soldiers killed in Afghanistan in the last few weeks alone. My cousin is deployed there right now. He's an infantry company commander. Thousands of our men and women in uniform have been killed in wasteful regime change wars since 9/11 alone. That's thousands of families here at home who have had to welcome their loved one home in a coffin. Now, so often these are statistics, numbers, names that might be flashed quickly on the TV screen for a moment, but for these families, that hole will never be filled. We have countless more veterans who've come home with visible and invisible wounds, where the cost of war remains very real every day. There's a cost of war that takes a toll on the people and the countries where we've waged these wars. Regime change wars in countries like Iraq, Libya, and ongoing war in Syria. There's a cost that is paid for by every one of us as taxpayers, with over $6 trillion, over $6 trillion going to pay for these wars that have nothing to do with keeping our country safe, strengthening our national security. These are wars that have been waged to overthrow authoritarian dictators in other countries that have actually resulted in the strengthening of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and others, bringing us to the point where now, as we just observed the 18th anniversary of that attack on 9/11, Al-Qaeda is stronger today than they were on that day in 2001. This is a disservice to every single American, every one of our service members, every one of our veterans. Our leaders have failed us. The leadership that I seek to bring will change course, will set our priorities straight, ending these wasteful regime change wars, stopping this policy of being the world's police, ending this new Cold War that we're in now with ever-escalating tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China. This arms race that's taking more money, billions more out of our pockets to build these weapons and these missiles that are making us and the world less safe, and redirect our resources towards serving the needs of our people here at home. That's what needs to be done. And that really is what is at the heart of what we know to be true. Foreign policy cannot be separated from any domestic issue or challenge that we face. Too often, I get asked by reporters who say, well, gosh, you talk about foreign policy a lot. What about all the other issues? And we talk about those things too, but we talk about foreign policy because it is central to the rest. And so long as we allow the status quo to continue, so long as we allow those to serve as commander-in-chief who lack the experience and the understanding, and most importantly, the conviction to stand up to the foreign policy establishment and the military-industrial complex to bring about an end to these wasteful wars, then we, the American people, will continue to be told there's just not enough. There's not enough to take care of the needs of your families and your children and your communities. But somehow there is always enough to start another wasteful war. I say that we, the people, say enough is enough. The time for change is now. Real change to bring about an end to this wasteful spending on these wars and weapons, and it's time to put the well-being of our people first. I will lead with a foreign policy that's based on cooperation rather than conflict, understanding that the only alternative to diplomacy is war. And so we've got to have the courage to have meetings with world leaders, to meet with both adversaries, with dictators, with people who we have huge disagreements on, to be able to work out those differences while understanding that there's progress to be made in areas of shared interest, of common interest. I think China is a very real and present example that we can point to. We do have issues with China, to say the least. IP theft, with a trade imbalance. There are issues that need to be addressed. But Trump's approach to this trade and tariff war has been irresponsible and erratic and impulsive and emotional, and it's taking a toll on our people, on our farmers, our manufacturers, our small businesses. And it's making us less safe because as Trump throws out words like, China is our enemy, how do you think China would react? How would you react? Somebody starts yelling at you, you're my enemy. You really gonna wanna work with us on things like climate change or shared economic interests? Not so much. And how about when you're dealing with another country that has many nuclear weapons? You're talking about a whole different kind of risk. And that's where we are today, where nuclear strategists are talking about we are at a greater risk of nuclear catastrophe now than we ever have been before. So when we talk about what's at stake, we're not talking about, well, this is just another election and yeah, you know, yada, yada, same issues, blah, blah, blah. No, our future is at stake. And unless we bring about this change, unless we walk away from this brink of nuclear catastrophe, we all will be in a place where we in Hawaii were last year in January, where we got a text alert from our state civil defense and over 1 million cell phones all across our state saying, incoming missile, seek immediate shelter, this is not a drill. And in that moment, reading that message, seek immediate shelter, this is not a drill, 15 minutes to live. 15 minutes to seek shelter from an incoming nuclear missile. Where do you go? Where do you go? This is, I mean, what people across our state, our loved ones were thinking, terrified. Where do you go? Where do you take your children? Where do you take mom and dad? What? Malka, to the mountains. Some people did that. But how long are you going to live in an underground cave in a mountain when you have nuclear fallout and a nuclear winter that follows? You've got to have months, you've got to have a very deep bunker, and you've got to have months and months of food and water and provisions to survive something like that. So this is the big joke. We get this notice saying, seek immediate shelter. We have leaders who have put us in this position where this message comes in and we're terrified because the threat is real, but there is nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. So this is the seriousness about the stakes that we are facing and why it's important for us to understand that it does not have to be this way. This is not the new norm that we have to accept. This is why leadership is important. And recognizing the most important job the president has, the most important responsibility the president has is to serve as commander-in-chief. And why this matters so much. This is why I'm running for president, to bring about this change, to use the experience that I have both serving as a soldier, my 2 deployments to the Middle East, my nearly 7 years in Congress, serving on the Foreign Affairs, Armed Services, Homeland Security committees, giving me that experience, that depth and understanding, and that conviction, knowing how real this is, to be able to walk into that Oval Office on day one, prepared to do that job, and not be intimidated by those who for so long have had influence over our leaders in Washington that have cost us so much today. Thank you for being here and joining me in this, and I look forward to your questions. Okay, Yvette is grabbing a mic. What's your hat say, sir? Okay, we'll take your question first.
Okay, My name's Bobby Fairchild. I'm running for city council. I'm on the ballot. I'm Robert Fairchild.
You commented on my Facebook page. I saw that you were coming tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Okay. Okay. So you said we spend $4 million in Afghanistan per
4
month.
billion.
Yeah, 4 billion. Billion per month, and you said you want to cut that down to like end the war and give.
Bring our troops home from Afghanistan.
Yeah, and bring and send that money to like to $3 million to give to states and cities to deal with infrastructure.
Is that your question?
Oh, okay. I was when I was thinking about that the math behind that, it seems that would be very hard to do. Because there's so many cities and counties.
Okay,
across
let me clear this up a little bit. I think the point that you've heard me make is the comparison of the $4 billion we're spending every month continuing to nation build in Afghanistan. We've been there now for, 18 years?
Oh, yeah.
And the $3 billion a year that the federal government currently gives to cities and counties across the country to help pay for needs in their local communities. So every city and county, and I served on the city council, and I know how important this funding is for municipal governments to be able to, buy fire trucks for their firefighters. You said you were a firefighter. You know how important that is to make sure our law enforcement have radios that actually work. Basic necessities. $3 billion every year is a pie of money that is split up between every city and county in this country. So my point was making that comparison because it's hard to wrap our heads around what does $6 trillion look like? What does that mean? How do we make this into something that's more practical that we can relate to? The disparity between the $4 billion a month we are spending to nation build in one other country, what to speak of the many others, and the $3 billion that is split up into teeny tiny pieces to our cities and counties across this country, illustrates how wrong-headed our priorities have been and the kind of change in priorities I seek to bring about. So I'm not saying, well, we take $4 billion a month and we do that with the cities and counties. No, not specifically. But what I'm saying is that we've got to bring those resources home, assess the needs that we have, and dedicate those resources to serving those needs.
Yeah. The reason I asked the question because Council Bluffs is 40 years behind its own infrastructure.
Yeah.
So.
And Council Bluffs is not alone in that, sadly. In my home state of Hawaii, just the water infrastructure needs alone has a price tag of over $1 billion. And that's for our small state. What to speak of when you look at the needs of other communities and states across the country. So we know the need is there. We pay taxes every year, every month, taxes coming out of our paychecks to serve those needs, but those needs are not being served. All right, we're gonna move on. We've got a lot of people, so we wanna get some other questions. Thank you. Yeah,
Hi, Tulsi. It's good to see you.
nice to see you. What's your name?
I'm Josh. I spoke to you earlier today. I
Oh,
drove
yes.
here from.
Thank you for being here.
I appreciate you coming here. I'm from Nebraska, so I don't get to see a lot of the candidates because most of them don't come through Council Bluffs, at least not that I've seen. But I just want to get a good answer from as many as I can on what specific steps do you think the federal government needs to take to deal with climate change? Because I hear a lot of just broad generalizations being made and a lot of candidates lacking specificity. And so I want to hear your thoughts on this issue.
Sure, the heart of my plan, and I've introduced in Congress the most ambitious climate change legislation called the Off Fossil Fuels Act that's ever been introduced. We're working on improving that bill and releasing a very detailed plan for my campaign, but I'll hit on the main points. One is the transition off of fossil fuels towards clean, renewable energy. Taking the $29 billion in taxpayer subsidies that are currently going to these fossil fuel giants who have been and continue to make massive profits, and instead taking those resources and investing it towards clean, renewable energy. Now, this is not just about a moral choice. This one is an economic one as well. We're in a place now where clean renewable energy costs are dropping lower than fossil fuels. So it makes sense for us from an environmental perspective, from a health and well-being perspective for our people, as well as a pocketbook perspective. It makes sense on every level. We need leaders who have the courage to make this change. I'm working with somebody right now in Texas, of all states in the country, Texas, who's been very successful in making some of these changes already there because they just make sense. And to me, those are the kinds of solutions that we need. The same goes for our infrastructure. As you mentioned, the infrastructure needs in this country are great. We need a bipartisan infrastructure package of investment, and it will be very expensive. But as we're making these investments and rebuilding necessary infrastructure in our country, we need to do so in a way that is sustainable and plans for this future, that supports a new green economy. The third major piece of this that I think is important, that actually doesn't get talked about often enough, is our agriculture industry. And how I've been through 2 different farm bills in Congress now, and it won't surprise you, and many of you may know this already, but a lot of the taxpayer subsidies and the priorities within that farm bill often go to these big multinational agriculture corporations who don't care about the quality of our soil. They don't care about the impact that they leave on our environment. They've got to use, abuse, and then move on to the next kind of philosophy, leaving us with the mess to clean up. So we've got to look at our agricultural practices and change our priorities so that we're actually investing in our local farmers, our family farms, and those sustainable practices that make sure we are able to continue to farm for generations to come. Last thing I'll say on this is we know that even when we do all of these things, and I believe it is urgent that we act on these things, it won't even begin to come close to doing what is necessary to deal with climate change. This is where, again, foreign policy is at the center of all these different issues. It requires leadership to work with leaders of other countries, to do this in a concerted fashion as a global community in order to make the kind of change that we need to see. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks for that. Aloha.
Aloha.
Never forget. Major Tulsi, the last major piece of legislation passed in this country was in 2009, the Affordable Care Act. We have been sitting on 10 years of gridlock because of establishments, because of corruption, because of people like Tom Perez, because of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because of the DNC elite who won't listen to the people, who are backing fracking now. How do we break the corporate control of our parties and return it back to the people?
Thank you. By doing what we're doing. By doing what we're doing. You know, if we just stay home and we're not involved in the process, then those who have the power now, that lies within the leaders in both political parties, it's the heart of Washington, D.C., will continue. They believe that they have the power to be the gatekeepers and to dictate who we, the American people, should have to choose from and where our priorities lie, when that's not the case. And we shouldn't believe it for a moment. I think Iowa voters know more than anyone else probably in the country how it is we the people who will make these decisions, that nobody else comes from the outside and tells us how to vote, who we should vote for, what kind of decisions that we should make. We've got to be involved in our democracy if we want to bring about these changes. We've got to be involved in our democracy in order to strengthen it. We've got to be involved in our democracy in order to take the influence of these big money corporations and special interests out of our politics, to be able to demand better and more from our elected leaders, to be able to pass legislation that will actually close the revolving door that we have in Washington right now, that perpetuates so much of the legal corruption that we're seeing, where you have people in many of these industries, whether you're talking about energy or defense or Wall Street or healthcare, people who are coming from corporate America, coming into a position of oversight and responsibility, whether as a lawmaker or otherwise, and then leaving and going back and getting a payout in the industry that they just left. We're not naive thinking that, oh, somebody who's working for a big bank on Wall Street and is then appointed to a position in the SEC is somehow all of a sudden going to be advocating for us. That's not the case. They go back and they look out for big banks on Wall Street and then go and get paid a lot of money when they go back to that industry. That's why we're in a place now where big banks on Wall Street are bigger now than they were when they were supposedly too big to fail. Why is it that Congress has not reinstated Glass-Steagall? That's heresy for so many in Washington because of the influence that these big banks have on Washington, on elected leaders, on senior staffers. But people get why this is so important. People aren't stupid. Unfortunately, Washington doesn't give people the credit that they deserve. Look, this is a big topic. There's a lot of different areas to address. Ultimately, in order to bring about that change, we the people need to take the power back. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, welcome back
Hi.
to Council Bluffs.
Thank you.
Jill Shudak, I'm the vice chair of the Potawatomi County Democrats. I'm
Awesome.
also running for Council Bluffs School Board.
Okay, cool.
So since you weren't able to make it to the debate stage, I'd like to give you a few minutes, just like your other colleagues that were running, to give us your broad plan for education. Universal pre-K, how are we going to handle student loan crisis? How are we going to get more teachers into the system? You talked about earlier how they're not paid well. Yeah. We need to bring back that profession. So I'd like to give you this opportunity.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for your service in many ways. My mom was actually the first elected official in our family, and she ran for our local school board in Hawaii. My parents are both teachers by trade and training. My father-in-law is currently still a public high school teacher in Hawaii. We understand deeply personally as a family the importance of education and the value that our teachers bring. And I think that that commitment and that recognition needs to be reflected in how teachers are paid. And I think we need to look at the partnership between the federal government and the local level towards making sure that our teachers are paid what they deserve. I think that if we look at that number may change state by state. Cost of living in my home state of Hawaii is significantly higher than here in Council Bluffs. It wouldn't make sense for a set salary to be the same for Council Bluffs versus Honolulu. The point is making sure that teachers are not in a position where you're struggling just to make ends meet, which a lot of teachers are. We also know how hard teachers work. You know, my father-in-law comes home. We ask him, hey, can you come over for dinner? He's like, nope, I'm spending all evening grading school papers. And he does it because he loves it. He's not complaining. This is a path of public service that teachers pursue. I think we've got to make sure that the value that we place on education is reflected towards those who are providing that education. I support universal pre-K, understanding the impact, the positive impact that that has on our kids being able to get a strong start in life. The college student debt crisis is a huge one that we need to recognize. And I think there's a number of things that we can do in different debt forgiveness plans. I'll be releasing the details of this. We're working on, I think, a unique approach to how we deal with this student debt crisis that deals with the immediate burden, but also looks at the bigger picture here of addressing the fact that the cost of education continues to increase without really any accountability. We keep talking about, well, how are we going to make it so that our students are able to get the education that they need without breaking the bank, but not really dealing with the root cause of the problem of why it's costing so much more. Dealing with the fact that for some reason in our society now, all of a sudden a master's degree has become almost the basic requirement just to be able to get a job in your field, no matter what it is. Whether it's being a social worker or pursuing a number of other things. Even for me now in the military, in the National Guard, I'm being told, well, I'm a major currently. If I want to get promoted and be competitive amongst my peers, I need to get a master's degree in whatever. Just get the piece of paper. To me, that's not helpful. this culture that we've created that says, well, you've got to have these numbers of pieces of paper or letters next to your name in order to be somebody or have this status symbol, even without even understanding that most folks who are graduating with a bachelor's and even a master's are still unable to get a job in the field of their choice that pays them enough to be able to live comfortably. So there are deeper issues that we need to face there. I think we need to place an emphasis on apprenticeships, on vocational training, on community colleges, and not look down on people who choose not to earn a 4-year degree and who want to go and earn a skill or a trade and get to work. There's nothing less respectable about that than those who choose to pursue a 4-year degree or a 6-year degree or whatever the case may be. So there's a culture thing that I think we need to address. Employers, and our government as well can help in doing that. And last thing I'll mention on this that I think really applies both to earning a college education as well as our total education system is how the use of technology can help provide more opportunity at lower to no cost to our students. I've seen how programs like the Khan Academy have really enhanced teachers' ability to be able to spend more time with students. If you have, for example, an online class in, I don't know, Algebra 1, you have an online class, kids are able to do the class, and the teacher has the ability then to go and help kids who might need a little bit more one-on-one time, a little bit more explanation on a certain concept or a certain equation, while others who get it are able to move on quickly on their own. So I think we need to look more creatively at how we can solve some of the root causes of the challenges that we are seeing throughout our education system so that bottom line, we reach that objective of helping people and providing them with the skills they need to pursue the path that they choose in their lives. Thank you.
Last question.
I'm going to go with you in the back there. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Susan.
Thanks for being here, Susan.
Thank you. I kind of want to go off what this gentleman up front said about the impasse and how discouraging it is to see year after year after year so little done in so many different issues. And I'm just wondering if you can give examples of how you have worked the process either in your state or in Congress that has worked.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question. And I think it's a great one to close our conversation out on because this really gets to the heart of what we're talking about. How do we get a government that works for us? How do we get a government that actually gets things done? It begins with respect. It begins with dialogue. That so long as we have a deeply divided government that is more interested in defeating the other side than actually serving the people, then we will continue to see the failure of action and results that the American people have suffered with for so long. So, practical things we can do. Respect is a great word, but what does it actually mean at a practical level? So when I got first elected to Congress, this was back in 2012. I was coming in as a freshman Democrat with a Republican majority, so in the minority, coming from a very small state with not a lot of political clout or seniority or anything like that. So some politicos, experienced people in Washington when I first got there, they were trying to give me some advice, helpful advice and tips, and they said, you know, coming in as a freshman Democrat from a small state, you're not going to get a bill passed. Don't even try. Republicans are in charge. Just come, build relationships, bide your time, and eventually when Democrats win again, then you can actually start to get things done. I listened, but I laughed because that's not why I ran for Congress, to just sit around and do nothing and wait for us to take over. No, I knew that I had to find a way to be able to be effective for my constituents and for our country right away. So one of the first things that I did and thought of was, how can I reach out? How can I build relationships with both Democrats and Republicans? And I chose the universal language of food to start with. timeless, universal truth. So my mother, back in Hawaii, she makes the most amazing macadamia nut toffee. It's highly addictive. I don't keep it in the house. It's dangerous stuff. But I called her and I said, you know, I want to be able to introduce myself to my 434 soon-to-be new friends. Would you make 434 boxes of your amazing toffee? Susan said, oh my God. And she's an amazing woman. She and my dad raised 5 kids. And she said, honey, I think that's a great idea. Absolutely, I'm in. Let's do this. I said, oh, I'm not done yet. I said, would you make another 434 bigger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress? And she paused only for a moment to say, that'll take a little longer, but okay. So back in Hawaii, she went to work and she was stirring 2 pots at the same time, pouring it in the pan, chopping the macadamia nuts. My dad always, he says, don't forget my role in this. He's quality control. He took 1 piece out of every pan just to make sure it was good enough. And as they were doing that, I was in DC and I was just writing handwritten notes to every one of my new colleagues, learning more about them, where they come from, you know, the issues in their district, what their background is, the committees they're on. And the incredible thing was that as soon as we started to deliver these little gifts of aloha, almost right away on the House floor, when we have votes, that's the only time that all of us are in one room together. And there were Republicans, senior ranking Republicans, chairmen of very powerful committees, making that long walk from the Republican side to the Democratic side, saying, where is this new member of Congress from Hawaii? And when finding me, saying, thank you so much. I ate all the toffee. I need more to take home to my family this weekend. And then most importantly, saying, tell me what's going on in your district. Tell me some of the things that you're working on. What's important to you? Let's work together. I'm the chairman of transportation, of energy and natural resources. I'm chairman of this committee or ranking member of that committee. Let's work together. Simple gesture of respect. Saying, this is who I am. I recognize you. We come from different places. We're in different political parties. We probably disagree on more things than we agree on. But I'm reaching out to you because I want to work together to serve the people that we've all been entrusted to serve. And by beginning those relationships on that platform, it's enabled me to be very effective throughout my time in Congress, now for almost 7 years, to pass legislation, to pass amendments to important bills, dealing with agriculture, dealing with our armed services, our veterans, education, and many other areas because of this foundation of respect. And so there are ways that we can all do this in our own lives every single day. But these are the kinds of things that need to happen more in Congress. And right now, too often, there's relationships there. You'll see people are nice to each other. They'll say, hey, how's it going? How was your vacation? How's your kids? And this kind of thing. But it's very superficial and it's very transactional. I can do this for you if you do this for me. Or worse, it is, there's a lot of backstabbing and dishonesty and lack of integrity. That's which therefore means you don't have a relationship. If you can't trust somebody, if you can't trust their word, then there is no relationship and there's no way to be able to work together. But I'll give you one specific example of a bill related to Native Hawaiian education. A program that had been authorized a couple of decades before, and it was expiring, and it needed to be reauthorized to provide funding for important education programs perpetuating Native Hawaiian culture for kids in Hawaii and across the country, Native Hawaiian education. Now, I was told that this was going to be impossible to pass. My staff came and said, look, the politics are stacked against you. Republicans are against this. They're against this every time we've ever tried before. Do you still want to go ahead with it? And I said, yes, absolutely. There's a lot of kids and families and teachers and schools who depend on this. this funding. So we put in the amendment, and as expected, you guys know the Heritage Foundation? When the amendment was scheduled for a vote, the night before, the Heritage Foundation sent out an email blast to members of Congress, Republicans, saying, don't vote for this amendment. Oppose this amendment, and it will be scored. Meaning for Republicans who care about a Heritage Foundation score, legislative score, they'll take a hit if they vote for this amendment. Normally, in that situation, with a Republican majority, that would mean certain death and failure. But because of those relationships that I had established, and this was, I think, in my maybe my second or third year in Congress, because of those relationships I established, I had my Republican friends calling me and texting me, finding me on the House floor, saying, hey, we got this email, showing it to me. Like, tell me what the real deal is. Why is this important to you? Is what they're saying true? Tell me why I should vote for it. And I made my case. I had the opportunity to make my case. And because that relationship was established, they knew I was going to tell them the truth, that I was going to be honest with them. Now, I didn't get every single one of them to vote yes, but I got enough to vote yes that we passed that with a very strong majority. And those funds got to the kids who needed it. This is the kind of leadership that I'll bring as president that will help to unify our country, recognizing the diversity that we have and not seeing it as a bad thing, but seeing it as our strength. And being inspired by the example of leaders like Abraham Lincoln, who surrounded himself with a team of rivals to benefit from that diversity, the creative solutions that different people would bring, no matter their political party. So that at the end of it, the end result is we bring the best possible solutions forward to fulfill our mission of serving the American people. Thank you so much. Great questions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending your evening with me. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Caitlin, and she's got a few notes for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Aloha. It's wonderful to see all of you out here tonight. So we had the opportunity to hear Tulsi share her story and share the story of our country. And I want to take a few minutes to share the story of our campaign and how you can be a part of it and help us make a difference. So Tulsi talks every time. I have the privilege of following across the country, and she's talking about how we build a government of, by, and for the people. And the way we do that, it's not later, it's not some other time, it's now, by building a movement of, by, and for the people. And I want to take a minute and just share with you the story. I've had the privilege of being part of this movement since Tulsi ran for Congress in 2012. And I've just been traveling around this country and got to Iowa a couple days ago and been crisscrossing the state, just listening to folks and absorbing what's on their mind and where they're at, and what's happening in their communities and what motivated them to stand up and support Tulsi. And it's amazing to me to hear the consistency. People want unity. They're sick of the divisiveness in their communities. I'm hearing from people across the political spectrum, across, from all different cultures and all different backgrounds. And this is something that I saw early on. I was in my early 20s. I was living out on a farm. I'd been really involved in anti-war activism after the Iraq War, and got burnt out when I saw we had the biggest anti-war movement in history around the globe. People, hundreds of thousands, millions of people marching in the street, and it didn't make a difference. It didn't move the needle. We didn't pull out. And just being a young kid, I was like, forget this. I'm going to a farm. I'm going to go grow some food. Tulsi came out to our tiny little podunk town. And I thought, gosh, nobody comes out here. Who comes out here? And so I came out. I was like, all right, I got to give her a chance. I came out, and I was just blown away immediately. I felt like this is what I was looking for, a leader who walks her talk, and who really believes she's rooted in her principles, rooted in her values, but she's willing to get in there and do the work that needs to be done to make a difference, build the relationships, have the tough conversations. And I really felt at that point that I can sit on the sidelines and complain for the rest of my life. That's not going to get us anywhere. When you meet somebody that's willing to do the work and is capable of changing people's hearts and changing their minds, I felt like it's my obligation to step up and do everything I can to support her and to support this movement. And so I did. It was 9 months sleeping on couches and flying all over the islands. And I just saw people from all walks of life all around Hawaii. Hawaii is one of the most diverse states in the nation. People from all different communities, people who'd never been involved in politics, coming out and saying, what can I do? And conversations starting between people who would have sat down and had a conversation before. And I kind of took it for granted. I didn't fully appreciate what was happening at the time. I just thought, this is awesome, we're riding this wave. And it wasn't until we won in a landslide. It wasn't until, really the will of the people came forward and it was clear to everybody. And then I started getting involved in other campaigns and people started coming around and saying, do you realize that's never happened before? That's never happened before. And then I kind of got some perspective and I understood how powerful it was to have somebody come forward and speak for the people and how hungry people were for that message. And that's the same thing I'm seeing as I'm crisscrossing Iowa and I've been in New Hampshire. It's just people who are so hungry for an opportunity to just be part of a movement that's about fundamental respect for each other. We're not always going to agree. One thing I've noticed is that most of our most hardcore supporters don't agree with Tulsi on a lot of issues because they tend to be independent thinkers. They tend to be people who've thought through every single thing and they've got their reasons. But that doesn't diminish their support because it's not about checking the boxes. It's not about, I'm on this team, you're on that team. It's about they see her really doing the work that needs to be done of healing the division in this country. So that's what our campaign is about. That's what our movement is about. And I really want to invite you, all of you in this room, to be a part of that. Because as hard as Tulsi works, as much as she travels, as much as she speaks, we're the ones we need to stand up and support her and make a difference. We need to be her messengers in our community. That's how change happens. So it's an exciting time to be working and organizing and working in campaigns. There's a lot of ways that we can use technology to really leverage every opportunity we have to have a conversation and build a connection with somebody. And we're using some really cool tools that I'm excited to share with you. So we're going to have, we've got our sign-up table here. You're welcome to sign up and just make a mark if you want to join our campaign. And then we're also going to have a photo line, and we'll be coming by and just checking in with each of you individually. But I want to kind of just give you a little bit of a vision, because sometimes I know you've always got those check boxes. Do you want to volunteer? And you don't maybe have like a picture in your head of, well, what does that mean? And who am I joining? What are we doing? What we're doing is we're doing the work now of having those conversations with our neighbors, with our friends, with our family, establishing that, reaching out in an attitude of respect and inviting them to be part of something bigger than each of us individually. So I'm excited to tell you more about it. You're welcome to come over and just find me, and we can take the time now to powwow about it, or we'll reach out to everybody if you put your name down on the list. So thank you all so much. Aloha.
All right, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. So we're going to have a selfie line now, and I'm going to ask everybody. We have 15 minutes. Tulsi has to leave in 15 minutes, so please consider that there's 60 other people behind you that would like the opportunity. So just have your cameras ready and snap and go. I'm so sorry, there's no time for any more questions or anything. So if I could have everyone that wants a picture line up in the center, and then the exit is that way. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. Aloha.
There's no car combination of words I could put on the back of a postcard. No song that I could sing, but I can try for your heart. Our dreams, and they are made out of real things, like a shoebox of photographs with sepia tone loving.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Have a good night. How you doing? Thanks for being here tonight.
Why we're here and where do we go? We're not going so hard. It's not always easy.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. We drive on. How are you? Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you so much. How are you, sir?
Of course.
Absolutely, I will. Thank you. Really appreciate your support. We're driving on. Thank you. How are you? Nice to meet you.
I love what you have to say.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your support. Have a great night. How are you? Nice to meet you. Thank you. Thank you for being with us here tonight. Thank you. Awesome. Really appreciate it.
They'll be gone too many things I have to do.
Of course. How are you, Jack? Nice to meet you. Hi, thank you. What's your name? Judy, nice to meet you. Thank you both for being here tonight.
With only two, just me and you. Not so many things we got to do, but places we got to be. We'll sit beneath the
Get you some votes in Nebraska.
Good. Thank you for your support. Really appreciate it. Have a good night. How are you? What's your name?
William.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks for being here tonight. Thank you. What's your name? Juliana. Nice to meet you. Thank you for your support. It means a lot to me. There you go. 1, 2. Got it. Thank you, guys. Have a good night. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm so nervous.
No worries. No worries. Good to see you here.
I believe in memories, they look so
Right on. Keep up the good work. Keep at it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That is quite the shirt.
Thank you.
Did you make it?
No, I got it
Online?
Etsy.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I love Etsy. Yeah. Here, I'll come over.
Sure. How are you? Nice to meet you.
no song I could sing.
Thanks for making the time to come tonight.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Are you from Council Bluffs?
No, from Nebraska.
Oh, okay, cool. Thanks
We
for
had a
coming
Nebraska game too, so there was
I've
people.
heard. Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Steve.
Nice to meet you.
Your mom
Thank
should
you.
make coffee for every U.S. citizen when you get elected president. How's
That's
that?
a good idea. She better start now. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night. Thanks for being here. How are you? What's your name?
I'm Jessie Taylor.
Nice to meet you, Jessie. Hi, Summer. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. You got a real camera. She know what she's doing. Give it to AJ. Give it to AJ. Give it to AJ. He knows what he's doing.
Who's to say what's impossible they forgot? This world keeps spinning with each new day. I can feel a change in everything. And there's a surface break
Awesome. Thank you both. So nice meeting you.
But in some ways they remain the same.
Thank you. I will. I will. Hi, how are you? What's your name?
Rowetta.
Rowetta.
My
Nice
sister
to meet
Rebecca. Rebecca's our sister. They follow you all over.
Oh, very cool. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm Republican. I like you.
Thank you. Well, we need your vote. Thank you.
Very nice.
I'll share this love I find with everyone.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Nice to meet you.
I don't want this feeling to go away.
Hi, what's your name?
We met,
Nice to meet
I
you.
think, Cedar Rapids.
Oh, early on.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for being here
of
and
course, I'm
sticking with us.
excited.
I love it.
Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Awesome.
Thank
you.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
I have a couple of photos.
Oh, sure.
I can't do everything.
That's a nice one.
Isn't
My
that
husband
great?
took this picture.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
And then just one right here.
Things aren't always
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate it. There you go.
upside down. I'll find the things they say just can't be found. I'll share this love
Have a great night. Thank you for your support.
We'll sing and dance tomorrow.
Hi. How are you? What's your name? Nick. Nice to meet you, Nick. Thanks for coming. Hi. Praveen. Nice to meet you. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate your support. Thank you. How are you? Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Thank you.
I just gotta ask, did Joe Rogan let you play with the flamethrower?
He didn't. I so wanted. I should have just asked. I'm sure if I would have asked, he would have let me. I was hoping I would get a chance.